Welcome to our Open to Hope webinar. We're happy to have you on this webinar today, and I'm hosting it, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter, Dr. Heidi Horsley. Our show today is regarding September 11th, a decade later, finding hope and healing after traumatic loss. Well, Heidi, this is going to be a great webinar, isn't it?
Yes, I'm definitely looking forward to it because we are going to talk about 9/11 and 10 years later, and where are they now, a decade later.
Absolutely. Well, you've certainly been heavily involved with this. I remember when you lived in, I live in San Francisco now, Heidi's in Manhattan, and Heidi was out in San Francisco with me, living out in San Francisco with her family when 9/11 happened. How do you want to talk a little bit about what happened then?
Sure. I was in San Francisco, as you said, and we are going to be talking with our guest today, Liz CREEL, one of my absolutely favorite people, and I'll be introducing her in a minute. She was actually in New York City on 9/11, and she can talk about her experience. But you know, I wasn't here in the city when that happened. I was in San Francisco, and I can't even imagine what it must have been like for people here in New York. But the devastation that we felt 3,000 miles away in San Francisco was huge. I mean, to see the World Trade Center being hit by planes and knowing that there were people in there, I knew immediately that this was extremely serious, and I remember just crying and being so devastated and watching, as we all did, completely transfixed to our televisions for weeks as these events unfolded, and we saw the thousands of lives that were lost in this horrific terrorist attack, and it was devastating. And I knew at that point that I was going to move back to New York City to help the city heal. I felt very pulled to come back here. Liz and I were both graduates at Columbia University, and I was felt, you know, really drawn to being here and knew I would come back. And so when the opportunity presented itself to come back and work with fire department families who had lost someone in 9/11, I jumped on that opportunity to be part of the healing experience, and Liz and I have spent years doing that, and we're going to talk a lot about that today.
Yeah, why don't we talk a little bit about the foundation and what we've gone on to do, and then let's get on to more about 9/11. Heidi and I have the Open to Hope radio show, and that's archived on our website. We have more than 500 shows that you can listen to. We have articles, over 3,000 articles on our website, and we have YouTubes. And by the way, this 9/11 will be made into YouTube, should be up on Saturday, so you'll be able to tell all the folks that you know that have missed it that you'd like to have them know about it. They'll be able to go on our site, www.opentohope.com, and log in. So I think the next slide is a picture of our website, I believe, and that is showing that we have radio, and we have YouTubes, and we have thousands of articles, and we're going to have some wonderful 9/11 articles. So we hope you'll go to that site and read in, and also you can comment too, and comment on the articles, and you can join our forum and comment. So we want you to be part of our Open to Hope community. And we wanted you also know about our book, which is called Open to Hope, and it is 104 of the writings of our Open to Hope authors, and this is all about grief, loss, hope, and healing. We're a foundation, and our mission is to help people find hope after loss. So Heidi, let's move on. Go ahead. Did you want to say something?
Mom, I'm gonna back up for a minute because I wanted to say, as far as the foundation goes, if you go on to Open to Hope Radio, if you go onto our website and you look at our radio shows, we have done numerous radio shows on 9/11. We did one with the Kiefer family, and they lost Michael Kiefer. He was a firefighter who died in the Trade Center. We talked with his parents. We talked with his siblings. And we've also interviewed Diane Kane, who is kind of, in a roundabout way, my supervisor on the FDNY Columbia University study. She is, you know, the assistant director for the counseling unit for the fire department. And we also had Dr. Grace Christon, who is the lead person in the study we're doing. So we have several shows about 9/11 talking about the experiences, why is this loss unique, and you know, what has happened to these families over time. So with that, I am going to introduce Elizabeth CREEL, also known as Liz. Like I said, Liz and I have grown very close over the last 10 years, and she's near and dear to my heart. She is an amazing person and a great clinician. Liz is an adjunct associate professor at Columbia University School of Social Work. She's a clinician right here in New York City in private practice in Manhattan, and she's worked on the Columbia University FDNY Family Guidance Program as a researcher and a clinician. And what we've done on this is we've been looking at traumatic loss over time in the families that have lost someone, a firefighter, in 9/11. So we've worked a lot with the children and the widows and run workshops for the parents and siblings as well. So, and best of all, Liz is a native New Yorker. So she will talk all about what it's like being a native New Yorker and having this devastation right here in her own neighborhood. Okay, Liz, welcome to the show, the webinar.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Welcome, Liz. It's great to have you on. And you know what? I'm going to start out early by taking a question because we get so many questions going on here that we want to make sure we get them for people and people that are out there if they want to ask us a question. But I just want to start out with a question from Roger from Newport Beach, California. Said, I'm really curious about how the families have done over the years.
Oh. Would you like me to respond to that, Gloria?
Mm-hmm. That's a good one because Liz and I just got off the phone, and she has just had contact with a lot of these families, and knows, like I said, we've been following them, and now are doing follow-up.
Yeah, and just to chime in a little bit because I did a little bit of it with you guys with Dr. Christ. It's a fabulous study, but it's home visits, which is kind of amazing.
Well, we. I think the families, I just recently spoke with several of the families that Heidi and I have been working with over the last, since 2002. And I have to say I'm very pleasantly surprised, not surprised so much, but very, happy to hear that a lot of the families are doing really well. The kids are growing up. They're in college. As many of the mothers said, I wouldn't even recognize the kids since we last saw them probably around 2007, Heidi, at that time when we were actively involved with the families. Some of the women have gone on and gotten married. Some have gotten divorced. Some have had children. And, as I heard the stories, it made me think how resilient, again, the whole issue that we talk about so often around traumatic grief, how difficult it is, of course, to experience such a loss, but that over time there is this ability, this amazing strength in people to come back from that horrific trauma, grief, loss, and continue to live life, have children, continue to.
Right. One of the things that I think is interesting getting to our slides is that I remember, just saying, oh, you've had a loss or whatever, and some of the families said it was murder. And I think that's interesting. I think you kind of forget that. And so I think that could bring us into our slide of what are the differences between a terrorist attack and a natural disaster. We've had all these floods and all these kinds of things. What do you two see as being the difference?
Well, I think you made a really good point, and I know that Liz has seen this too. Especially when I went in and ran the sibling loss workshops. At first I wanted to just use the word killed. And I would go in and say, your husband or your father or your sibling was killed. And I was quickly reminded that this actually wasn't just some kind of random death. This was murder. And so the way that they thought about that was different because it was very traumatic to have somebody that you love. And, yes, they are working on the job as a firefighter, but they don't expect to be murdered on the job. And there were thousands of people murdered that day. And so, Liz can take over some of this, but, I think that leads people to feelings of, like we see on this slide, feelings of threat and fear. You're no longer living in a safe and predictable world anymore. Feeling like it may be a dangerous place. And Liz, early on, a lot of families didn't want to go into Manhattan, right?
Oh, absolutely. And, there are still some families who, even as we approach the 10th anniversary, are a little hesitant about going down to the site, a place where they say, is such a reminder of such angst for them. And, I wanted to also just get back to your point about what people are feeling, that difference between what happened on 9/11 and some natural disasters. They are angry still. The families did express that the kids had begun as they got older, because a lot of the kids now are 16, 15, 16, 17, 18, that anger was coming out, and that the mothers that I had spoken to still expressed feeling angry that they, had to go through this and they didn't have their husbands here anymore. So that I think the anger is anger, and I don't know, fear probably. I feel fear. I still feel threatened living in New York. As I told Heidi about a week ago, as I began to hear the media blitz, bombarding us with the visions of what happened on 9/11, I was really hit by how emotional I got, and how I heard about, and probably you heard, Heidi, as well, that the alert system, we were on higher alert as 9/11 approaches. So all of that whole collection of feelings, feeling threatened, anger, fear, it's still present. It's still
absolutely. I mean,
so
on Saturday I was flying back to San Francisco, and I'm just sitting there in a casual way in the San Francisco airport, and the media approaches me, NBC, and says, "How do you feel about flying to New York City when 9/11 is happening in a week and terrorist threats have now gone up?" And that puts you, like you said, Liz, into a very different place, because now all of a sudden you're back where you were initially, feeling threatened and feeling scared and feeling anxious. And for these families, it's even heightened more because they had someone die that day. So, yeah, I agree with you.
We just
well,
had
flying
another,
is no longer what it was, that's for sure.
yeah, we just had another question come in from Peggy, and she said, I hate all the 9/11 reminders. My uncle was Tanner Fitzgerald, and every time they show the towers being hit on television, I want to throw up, and I start to cry. Do you think I need therapy? After all, it's been 10 years.
If I may say, I mean, what she just described, this woman, is, I would say, exactly what I was feeling, which I had described to Heidi only a couple of days ago. Real emotionality, really upset, and so I don't know. It's hard to tell, right, to answer that question, to respond to that question. Everyone is different, how they do respond. We do have these sort of periodic bolts of upsetness and fear and overwhelmness as the anniversary approaches. But I think one of the things you have to, I don't know if that necessarily requires us to go into therapy, but I think it's a time when we could really benefit from being with friends, being with people, friends, family, who we can get some support around, because I think we're tender still. I think we're real, I think we're even more tender than we think we're going to be. But I also
I agree with Liz. Yeah. I agree with you, Liz. And you know, the reality, I think that's what we saw that was difficult for these families, is all the constant reminders, and they don't have any control over when they're going to see them. When is it going to be in the media? When is it going to be in print? On the front of People magazine. Right now on the front of People magazine, there are 10 or 12 children that were born after 9/11. Their mothers were all pregnant when their fathers were killed in the Trade Center. I mean, you're sitting at the grocery store being reminded and inundated radio media constantly, and you have no control over when it's going to happen.
Well, the one thing I want to say about that is that one of the mothers I spoke to said, you know, I do get anxious every year in August, about a month before September 11th. It starts to rise. The anxiety starts to rise. She said, I've learned how to deal with it. And I asked her what she did, and she specifically said, I avoid the media as much as possible. I avoid watching television, reading newspapers. I try to limit my exposure to these reminders. And I thought that was, you know what, sometimes we're pulled into it. We want to watch it. It helps us somehow, you know, even as we did on September 11th, 2001. I think that's why we watched it so much. We had to sort of work it through somehow, and also we had no control over it. But I think this is a good idea for people who are particularly feeling sensitive, is to limit your exposure, whenever you can, to all the media blitz.
You're making a really, really good point, Liz, and I think you really need to limit children's exposure, especially because what we saw is that children saw the towers fall over and over and over, and they thought the city was being attacked everywhere. They didn't realize that the media was playing over the same towers over and over. So we've got to be careful about what we're exposing children to. And, you know, when your television set is on at 6 p.m. and the kids are home, right now you need to be careful about allowing them to see these horrific images. They're very graphic, and they can scare children.
You know, regarding these constant reminders, and we've got another email here that kind of fits in with that. It's a Bernice from Lake Placid, California. She says, my dad was a firefighter and died in the line of duty. I live in a small town and people, oh, it wasn't 9/11. I live in a small town and people were very supportive. It's been 7 years now, and I was thinking about what my family will do in 10-year mark. I wasn't thinking we would do much. I don't know if I would like it if we had to relive the experience like the 9/11 families.
I really can relate to what she's saying. I have heard from the families that they are feeling they're feeling anxious about having, as this woman has just said, having to have all these reminders brought to the surface again. And there, you know, I think there's a certain, I don't know if it's obligation, but I think for some of these families, they're feeling the pull to go to the site, you know, but some are also choosing not to do that. They don't want to be overwhelmed on that day. One of the families who has a large family is, in fact, saying, I'm going to go to a mass at the fire department. I'm going to go to what I usually feel comfortable doing and what I have been doing for the last couple of years. And when we're ready, and perhaps when the whole hoopla, and I don't mean that in any kind of derogatory way, but when all this goes, so I think it depends on the person, but I think people should do what makes them feel comfortable and not have a big expectation of having to do something big.
Well, certainly one of the problems is that different family members want to do different things too.
Right, Mom. I agree.
So with Peggy, I mean with Bernice, I like that idea. She's going to have to think about what she wants to do. And I just wanted to say one thing to Peggy. I didn't kind of close with her. Is she said, do I need therapy? And I would say, you know, if it's just around 9/11, we're going to have, on our next slide, we're going to have some ideas for you, Peggy, for managing stress. So if it's just around this one event and seeing the towers that you're feeling this ill, as Liz said, I think it's pretty normalizing. But here's some managing stress ideas.
Yeah, I wanted to say one thing about the reminders also. The flip side of this is that a lot of the families have said, you know, one of the positives is that we know that our loved ones will never be forgotten. The country is never, ever going to let this tragedy be forgotten and our loved ones be forgotten. Now, you know, if in some cases when we have people die, we worry that people will forget. And so the positive of all this, of all these reminders and memorials, is that other people are grieving this loss and that you know that your loved one is not forgotten.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You know,
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say that in terms of reminders also, I just want to underscore your point about people wanting to do different things. One of the families, some of the kids are going to come home from college, some are not. And I thought that was really good. Right, of the firefighter families are going to come back and some are not. Exactly, some said they want to go down to the site, others didn't. So I think the moms are really trying to listen to the kids and be responsive to individual needs, which I think is the best way to go.
And not put too much pressure on them, it sounds like, Liz.
Not too much pressure. On the other hand, it was interesting, one family told me a story how the brother of the firefighter who died, every day since the last 10 years, he's been wearing firefighter shirts that were, and firefighter kind of outfits because he was afraid that his brother would be forgotten. So, you know, people continue to express their loss in so many ways, and I think it is good that people have that opportunity to do that, to tell you the truth.
So let's talk about managing stress, and I know a lot of these points we've got here, you know, have come from the families too, what they're doing. Liz, do you want to talk about that a little bit, starting?
Yeah, sure. I think that, you know, what I was hearing both during the time that, you know, the earlier period that we worked with the families and now, is that I think one of the best ways to deal with stress is to have support systems available, you know, close to you, to have people you can go to talk with, to have people who understand your concerns without even having to say, without advice giving, just having people who can hear what you have to say, be there for you. And also some of the women, I think how they've dealt with stress at different points is they've gotten back to work because they didn't want to have too much time on their hands, especially as the kids are starting to leave and go off to school. And, so the mothers of, and it's very interesting to see what people are doing. Like I said, one of the things is they're staying busy, they're staying occupied, they're going back to work, and it took a number of years, but they're doing what they think makes them feel better, and it is making them feel better according to them.
Yeah, and Liz and I facilitated a lot of workshops and groups, and it was really, really helpful for the families to get together because it really normalized their experience and made them feel like, okay, what I'm going through is normal. It's not crazy. It's not strange. It's not weird. It's not negative. It's a normal experience. And I think that's what's important about, like Liz keeps saying, staying connected to people, especially people that have had traumatic loss, so that you can, it normalizes their experience.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that we found, Liz, I don't know if you remember this, but we didn't start seeing firefighter families, 9/11 families, for 10 months. The fire department felt that we needed to wait for 10 months because they were being inundated with the media. They were being flooded by everybody. They needed some space. Well, we went in, I never will forget, in July, at 10 months after 9/11, the families kept saying to me over and over, where were you at the beginning? We needed you there because we needed you to help us navigate the media and keep them at bay and help us with, all these people that wanted to have a part of us and wanted to tell our story. We didn't know how to navigate that. We needed support early on. So I think one of the things we learned is to go in immediately after something like this, a traumatic loss. Go in immediately. Don't wait. People need you at day one.
Yeah. Heidi, could you go over the points of managing the stress for us? Some of the things.
Sure. I think we covered a lot. Turn off the television. Cancel newspapers and magazines because, the event is right there on the front page, front and center. Screen media with voicemail. People are calling. Liz, you remember. And Mom, you've heard these stories too because you were involved with the family. There were media camped out in bushes, calling the families constantly, pretending they were somebody else to get their story, ringing the doorbell. I mean, it was just ongoing. So, and now at 10 years, it's happening again. So, not on that level, but it's still happening. Get people to screen your voice messages. Trusted friends and family consultants, we're always saying this. Use them to serve as an intermediary for you. I think that's important too.
I really thought it was fascinating that they canceled newspapers and magazines, and it wasn't unusual to hear them say that or turn off the TV. I think that's one thing, even for Peggy, who was saying she hated it. Maybe she shouldn't be watching any of those. If it upsets her, avoiding it is not a bad coping mechanism for somebody.
And also, I've noticed something, Mom, with these 9/11 events. I know you both have too. There's a lot of shows about the atrocities of that day, but there's other shows about the resilience and the strength and the human spirit that are very positive about where are they now. So maybe you need to balance all the, you can revisit the atrocity because we never want to forget, but balance that out with some of the more positive stories about the amazing things that came out of 9/11 and the incredible things that happened.
Absolutely, and we'll be getting to post-traumatic growth in a minute, but before that, we've got an email here, and I'm going to do a little preface to this email, because one of the things that I thought was really interesting, I lived in San Francisco during the big earthquake a few years ago, and it was interesting because I was a practicing psychotherapist in the city at that time, and they were asking for psychotherapists who wanted to work with families of the earthquake. Well, we were there. I was right there at the Pacific Heights. We were in the midst of it, and they were asking for people to come in and support people who'd been in the earthquake. And I think that's kind of fascinating because we're asking mental health workers who've been in Manhattan to come in and work in Manhattan, with families who have been traumatized by it, when we were all traumatized by it. Pretty interesting. But this is a question I want to bring up. It comes from Richard from Manhattan, and he says, asks, have your personal tragedy, have your personal tragedies enhanced or empowered your ability to work after 9/11?
Enhanced or impaired my abilities?
Yeah, yourself being personally involved in it. We were all
For
personally
me,
involved in it, particularly Liz in Manhattan, but go ahead with your.
for me, this is Heidi. My personal experience having a brother who died after the car he was driving in blew up. He and my cousin died together. It was a very traumatic loss, and I understood on a very deep level what it's like not to have an intact body and to only have remains to look at. I felt that my personal experience enhanced me completely because I was able to go into the family's homes, hear very traumatic stories, and also normalize for them what they were going through. Because I, on some level, I didn't understand what it was like to lose someone in 9/11, but I knew what it was like to lose someone suddenly and traumatically. So for me, I feel like it's enhanced my work.
And
Liz?
I would definitely have to say, that for me, my experience is, I've been working in the area of oncology in my profession for over 8 or 9 years, working with people who were, faced with cancer diagnosis and, who survive and who don't survive. And then I'm working with the 9/11 Project. And then unfortunately, I lost my husband at the end of '07 in a tragic accident. And I have to say that from all the work that I've done and all the experiences that I've had with people who went through traumatic events and traumatic losses, it happened to help me through my loss, particularly around helping my kids, who I know, for many of us is it's a priority. And it's not the only priority, but it's a big priority for those who have kids. When there's a loss, is how do you help them? How do you help them get through it? Are you doing the right thing? And I have to say that having gone through work with the families of 9/11, that has helped me I think has helped me and continues. It's not an end, right? It's not the process. It is not finished, but it's been helping me.
It is so ironic, Liz, and I've talked about this with you. Here Liz spent 6, 7 years of her life, completely entrenched in this 9/11 study, and in a sense she was preparing and had no idea for her own experience of traumatic loss with her own spouse. It's just ironic how that ended up happening. And it sounds like you learned from being a clinician and a researcher, you kind of knew the key elements, and you learned, okay, I now know how to better help my kids because I've been on a team that's been helping widows help their children.
Absolutely, and also yes, absolutely, and I also think I remember vividly, particularly in the first year, that I think that people would, more than one, several people, friends would come and talk to my boys. Jesse was 16 at the time, Dylan was 14 at the time, but they were encouraging them to talk about the experience, to be open. They would talk about Larry, who was my husband, with the kids, and it was like people have become, I believe, more educated, more knowledgeable, more understanding of how to help people who've experienced the loss. That's how I experienced it. Like people came into our lives, friends that knew, I think because they had been exposed to organizations like yours, like Open to Hope, where they've come to understand how do you help a family, how do you help kids. And one of the ways, for example, just one way is keep talking about the person who died. Don't feel uncomfortable. Encourage them to open up about the experience. So I thought it was a very powerful thing for my kids to hear directly from other people in a compassionate way, that it was okay, at their own pace, at their own time, but it was a good thing to keep communication open, and to also talk about Larry, which I think there are a lot of people that don't know what to do to help others, but I think people are learning.
Yeah.
I think that's another thing that the whole public nature of September 11th and that event in 2001 has done. It has really kind of educated this country on grief and loss and how to not make it taboo and how to help others. There's been some positive things that have come out of that for our country as a whole on how to deal with trauma and grief and loss and death.
Let's move on to our next slide about helping others who have been impacted, because that kind of connects with this. But also, I've got some questions for you guys. One is, let's see, were you paid for your work? You did. How do you feel about that? Who wants to take that?
Oh, we have to eat, don't we? Now, if we were starving, how could we do this work? We were paid for this work, and I feel fine about that. I mean, Liz can speak to that too, but
Yeah.
we put in hours and hours and hours, and there were a lot of things that we did where we were not on the time clock. We were on the time clock when we were with the families and in the cars, but there was so much time that Liz and I were responding to emails and texts and phone calls 24/7, especially when the kids became teenagers. And you know what? We didn't bill for that because this was such a labor of love for us. And our team gave everything they had 24/7 because not only did we want to help the families, we wanted to help the country heal again. And I really feel that it was an honor to be part of that journey.
You want to give a quick answer to that too, Liz, and then I've got a couple of other.
I just agree with everything Heidi said. I think, yeah, I mean, I am a professional social worker. No, that's what we do. You know, that's what we do.
Yes.
That's what
Yes.
social work does. That's what
Totally.
therapists do. And so it was also it was a privilege, actually, to have had the opportunity to work with the families.
It was absolutely amazing. I went in and worked with one family, and we met because they're asking who consulted or supervised you while you did the work. It was a study that Grace Christ at Columbia University, Dr. Grace Christ got the grant for, and they can talk about where it came from or whatever, but we would go there when I came in from San Francisco. We would meet at her office, and I know you guys, her office quote home by Columbia University, as a wonderful nurturing team, and talk about the families. Her husband was doing the data collection, and it was a wonderful family feeling there, and it was kind of amazing, which gets into another question. How did you take care of yourself?
Mom, yeah, can I say one more thing before we get into the next question?
No, how do you take care of yourself?
This all comes into, it's about the funding and how we got paid. You know, we got paid initially through Liberty Funds, and the funding came from the people of the world. And people wanted to help the city heal, and the way they did it was to send money into Liberty Funds. So it was a healing therapeutic process for money to be used by experts like us to go in to help these families. So that's really how we were funded for the first few years.
And by the way, the study goes on.
Right. We're now doing follow-up with this. Yeah, we're now doing follow-up with the family.
We don't necessarily have some money for it, but we're trying to keep things going, even though there isn't that source.
Liz, this is an example of how much we believe in the study, and this is the most comprehensive study to come out of 9/11. Liz and I are now doing follow-up for free. So, you know, we've been in contact with the families where I've seen a couple of them. She's seen some of them. We're doing follow-up to find out where are they now. And right now, as of right now, we do not have funding for this part of the study. So if anyone wants to send funding, we're here.
We're here.
All right, so I think another question is, how do you take care of yourselves? And I think helping those who have been impacted is part of the way you guys and we took care of ourselves during that study too. Communication. You want to talk about recording things and talking in the car and all that? That was pretty great.
The team. I know Liz can say more about it. It's the team. I felt like the team allowed us not to have burnout. Going into these homes with the team was really incredible.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it was the key. You know, we went in with a team because one person was and I think it also made it a little more comfortable for the family. It wasn't just one person. I think there was more services, more help for them. But what we did after we saw the families, as Heidi was just referencing, is we would get in our cars, we'd pull into a driveway like a McDonald's parking lot somewhere out in Long Island, and we recorded our impressions and our thoughts and kind of a summary of what the families had told us with an eye on strategies and thoughts for how to help the family move forward. And I found that very helpful. I mean, it really gave us an opportunity to share our thoughts and to help each other figure out next steps. I found that tremendously helpful and was right on the spot, which I loved.
Absolutely, and you know, initially the first year or two was pretty intense, and I remember going into the car and being, sometimes it was emotional, and we could get in the car and kind of let down and go, oh my God, that was so difficult. And just to have that place to be able to process our own emotions around what was happening was really important.
Absolutely, and our weekly meetings, which I have to say, you know, I give Grace Chris, our project director, a lot of credit for many reasons. But one of the things I really appreciated is that we consistently met, right, Heidi, every week for team meetings to review how things were going, how the families, how we were doing. I found that, and that's almost a non-existent thing these days in social work, where you have an opportunity to really get supervision, to do mutual support. That doesn't happen anymore because of cutbacks, et cetera. So that was a jewel in this process. Kept me going for sure.
I agree.
So we've got another question here, which is kind of our thought, I guess I would say. It's Susan from Elmhurst, Queens. I was nowhere near the towers when they were hit, but what really annoys me is how people tell stories how they were saved by God or good luck and how they were almost in the building, but when you pin them down, it's something like, I was planning on going to a job interview later that day. I found a lot of people really stretching the truth, and it made me angry for the people who had had the losses.
Well, I think a lot of people wanted to feel like they were part of the experience. And there was people that weren't there that did experience secondary trauma. You know, just because they saw it on television or were, you know, just felt those losses. So I don't know, Liz. What thoughts do you have about that question?
You know, it's interesting when she said that. I hear what she's saying, but you know what? There was, I think, I agree with you. I think we all vicariously, even if we weren't there, we're almost imagining, fantasizing what it would have been like to be there. I mean, like, because you know what? If you live in New York, chances of being downtown or near the world is not that uncommon. It's not like a little far-off place in the corner someplace. It was a very active place. And actually, I did meet people. I remember that day very vividly, the day after 9/11, when I was walking down Broadway, and people were just gathering on the streets, and I saw my neighbor, and he, in fact, was supposed to go to a meeting in one of the towers, and it got canceled. But if he went to that meeting, it's like it's almost like a near-death experience, but it's not a near-death experience, but it's what would have happened if I would have been there? I could have been dead. And
because it did put our whole world into question.
Yes.
It's like, oh my God, this happened, and what if it happened again somewhere else? And you know, people suddenly die. You know, this is scary. This random event, happened. And the one thing that I heard, which I really agree with this woman on, is that people that didn't have a loss, so it was God's will that my son didn't die in this trade center. Well, what if your son died in the trade center? Was it God's will? So I mean, I think that the people that lost people took issue with those kind of statements.
And also, I remember at Cancer Care, when I worked at Cancer Care, one's faith gets rattled tremendously. It can get rattled, shaken, turned upside down when someone goes through a traumatic event. So, I think there's some people who, abandoned God if they lost somebody, or had lost someone in another event. But I think even if they don't abandon God, if they're religious, I think they do. A lot of questions get raised, like how could something like this happen? How could something so devastating happen? So something happened spiritually and on a religious level for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And we've got another question here. But before we get to the question, we've got people listening from all over the world, and I wanted to say that we do honor those who died in the Pentagon. And was it in Pennsylvania, the airplane crash?
Thanks, Pennsylvania. Yes.
Yeah, and we want to let you all know that we have you in our hearts too. It's just that we happen to have worked, in the 9/11 venue. But and I wonder how that is for those folks. All the stuff about 9/11 in New York, how they feel about not having as much.
I can't answer that, but when I talk about 9/11, I absolutely mean everybody that died in the terrorist attacks, whether it was on an airplane, in the Pentagon, in the Trade Center, or just walking past the Trade Center. However they died, it's, for me, 9/11 includes all of that. But that's a good point, Mom.
So do you guys feel like we kind of covered the slide on helping those that have been impacted, educate, normalize, empower? Is that how you worked with the families?
Absolutely, yes.
I would say so.
We did a lot of co-parenting, too, because, these women were young widows for the most part. I mean, all of them. They all had young children. The oldest one was like 50. They were all between the ages of 23 and 50, and all of a sudden they had all these kids, and they did not have a spouse anymore. So they often bounced ideas past us, etc., and wanted to know if they were making the right choices, given that they were parenting on their own, and it was a big responsibility now to raise children solo. So,
yep. It is very interesting about that, because the firefighters, I don't think, unless you know a firefighter family, you know that they don't exactly work the 5-day work week. Do one of you want to talk about that, how they help each other and build houses and do things together and their home, right?
Oh, yeah. It was really, I have to say, it was really, it was another part of the pleasure of working with this group, the privilege, really, because it exposed me to a culture that, is a very famous culture in New York. It's the firefighters. They're a very close-knit family. I know Heidi and I have been in many of the families' homes that were after 9/11, and also before 9/11. Firefighters, they get off of work, they have their days off, as you said, Gloria, and then the other day they're usually working another job. They're usually doing carpentry, a host of things. But matter of fact, recently, speaking of building and helping each other build houses, etc., one of my families just recently remarried, and she's building a new house, like right around the corner. So she's in the neighborhood. And one of the things she was really happy about is a friend of hers is going to buy her house. So she will continue to have the opportunity to be in the house that her husband helped build and the firefighters helped build, because she was feeling guilty about sort of moving into another home because this had so many memories for her and had a lot of symbolism. But she was talking about that. So, yeah, they really helped each other a lot.
They do, and the other thing is that these firefighters were like Mr. Moms, because they worked 2 24s. They would work 2 days a week, 24/7, and then they would be home 5 days a week, taking care of the kids. They were on-hand dads. They were great cooks, because, you learn how to cook in the firehouse. So when these kids lost their dads, they lost a really integral person in their lives. Somebody that was there for them on hand 24/7.
Yeah.
So we've got another question here. How did the money that the people received impact their experience?
One of the things we really saw is it gave the women, most of the women, I would say the majority, if not all of them, were working prior to 9/11. And the money allowed them the option of not working. And I think initially that was very important, because their kids really, really needed them, and they no longer had a father. The money was a huge issue, because these women were very proud, and they had very good, solid values, etc., and they felt like it was blood money. And we really had to give them permission to use some of that money to benefit their children. And I think it was initially very difficult, don't you, Liz?
Absolutely, and as there were many families that stayed in their homes, did not move out. I would say until maybe 5 years after. Again, feeling like they didn't want to move out of the home where their husband had been. They didn't want to disrupt their kids' lives. But over a period of time, it really did. Well, they did make some other choices. We saw Heidi, some of the families we had in common moved on to other homes, and but one of the things that was definitely was definitely true for most of the families, is that they've had a hard time having so much money, quote unquote, having that kind of money. These are working class people. Not only are they working class, but they also believed very strongly in the values that were that are associated with working class. So they felt not quite, it was guilty perhaps, but just uncomfortable with having that much money. And there were, as you know, there were many of the parents, the mothers, who made a decision not to discuss the money with their children, for example, to set up funds, et cetera, that where their kids would have that in the future. But I don't think I saw one family that went on, you know, shopping sprees. I mean, I know there was some in the news that
I agree with Liz.
Showcase, but the families that I knew, they were very hesitant about, if you will, even utilizing the money in a kind of precarious way. They were pretty.
They use it very responsibly, like Liz said. I think the media has gotten a hold of a few examples and really blown those up as being the norm, and that has not been my experience. In fact, I've got to tell you, I felt most of the families were extremely conservative, and when some of them moved to homes, better homes, the homes still were, you know, pretty average. And I was kind of like, wow, these people have a lot of money, and they're really not spending it. They're being very conservative, and they're thinking about their children, and they're thinking about college funds, and they're thinking, you know, they're saving for those kind of things, and they're keeping the values, the working class values that they're so proud of, intact in these kids, or at least trying to.
Okay, we've got another question here. How much money did they get, and where did it come from?
Wow, the taboo question, Liz.
Right,
Even though they can look it up on the internet, it all depended on the amount of children they had.
We didn't discuss that with the families. We felt that was something that
so whoever asked that question can go on the internet and pick it up. Let me say one thing about the money, which I think is really difficult, and I don't think people realize this, and I do, because I had the same thing happen when my son was killed in an automobile accident. He was not driving, and it was a death, and when there's a death, there's compensation from the insurance company. It was an automobile accident, and we had to go to a lawyer, and they had to talk about what his life was worth, and every one of these families had to go to an arbitrator or a lawyer and talk about what their loved one's life was worth, and that is a very difficult thing. So,
you know, Mom, you're reminding me. I sat down with two families early on, and I'll never forget this because there were tears streaming down these widows' faces, and they were saying, Heidi, how much do you think we should compensate my husband, my deceased husband, for the fact that he was going to teach my son how to tie his tie? And how much could we compensate him for the fact that he was going to teach him how to throw a basketball, you know, how to throw, you know, make a basket and play basketball. I mean, these, like you said, every single thing they had to write down before they had compensation. What is a person's life worth? I don't think we could put a price on people's lives.
Yeah, and they went more than once. They went more than once. It wasn't just one appointment you had.
Right, and the packages, we know this, the paperwork that they had, this I do know. The paperwork and the package material that they had to fill was exhaustive, and they needed a lot of guidance actually to complete this, as you're saying, you know. But I don't know how someone puts a value on, as you're saying, on someone's life. That's very, Gloria, I didn't know that. That's very, that's painful to hear that, actually.
Yeah, it's a hideous experience, and my heart still goes out to everyone who's ever had to go through that. Well, let's get to post-traumatic growth, because as we started the show with that, Liz, with the question that we had about how, from Roger in Newport Beach said, I'm really curious about how the families have done over the years. And let's talk a little bit about post-traumatic growth. Lawrence Calhoun and Richard Tedeschi have studied this extensively and interviewed many, many families. They weren't the 9/11 families, but Heidi and Liz, what do you think about what they've said about post-traumatic stress? Where did you see that with the
post-traumatic growth?
I mean, excuse me, growth.
I just have to say, first of all, that phrase is perfect, because often you hear only post-traumatic stress. Just the phrase opens up a whole dialogue about other kinds of stuff. So, I mean, I have to say that the families that I have worked with have grown stronger, have grown closer, have found strength in places that and from wherever that they didn't even know they had. And I think they sometimes look back and say, how did I do that? How did I get through? And I think, again, it partly comes from this, I don't know how to describe it, something beyond description. And, you know, we do rise up. I really believe this. I think we do rise up and, you know, try to find a way to survive and beyond, you know, because if we don't, I don't know what the old, you know what I mean? But I think a lot of people have that quality, and and often I think when they talk about it, they don't even know how to describe it. You know, when you get through, it's like, how did I make it through that?
Absolutely. Heidi, why don't you just run through the post-traumatic growth areas, because I think they're very nice. I like to hear them and look at them and think about them.
Okay, well, you know, Lawrence Calhoun and Richard Dudusky were on one of our shows talking about this, and it's archived on the site, and I love it also for what Liz is saying. We are so focused on the negative impacts of loss that oftentimes we forget about all the positive impacts. And we did, like Liz said, see the positive impacts, especially now 10 years later. We have seen these kind of things. So what they found in looking at families is that individuals after a loss found higher meaning. They had spiritual development. Their relationships improved. They gained a sense of personal strength, and they had a better appreciation of life and new interests and priorities. And I really, really think a lot of that is true. I mean, everybody on this call, on this webinar today has had a traumatic loss, and when you have somebody die suddenly, it shakes your belief to the core. And after that, I think you look at life completely differently, and you really do embrace those close to you and have a completely new and deeper appreciation for those that you love and for your own life.
And for
I have to say, go ahead,
Liz.
sorry.
No, go
I
ahead.
was just going to say and, you know, make a comment about my own experience when my husband died, that when I look over the last couple of years, I have made significant changes. I have to tell, I'm a little blown away by it, and it's quite amazing, but I have made changes in relationships, particularly relationships, for example, that were not respectful to me or was sort of borderline being abusive. I'm talking about whether it be family members, friends, and I don't know what I'm saying about it, I'm just telling you my personal experience, but I think that something happened to me that there was a new sense of, I don't know, valuing life, valuing my own opinion, valuing myself. I'm not really sure what it was, but I made very dramatic changes around certain relationships. And while that was very difficult to do, there was, you know, someone in my family, a close person I had been close to, but that had been a very tumultuous and a very conflicted relationship. And there were some things that were done. But my point is that after Larry's death, I decided that I didn't want to put up with that anymore. And you know, and that's not a small thing. And I'm not saying I'm happy that I did it, but I think it was I think it's valuable for my life, if you don't understand what I mean. Like, it's not like joyous, but that I think it was important, and that hopefully, you know, down the road, I'm going to hopefully bear the fruit of making
well, Liz, you know, I think that
you know what I
Larry
mean?
dying and Scott dying and Matthew dying shows us that life is short, and we need to have positive people in our lives and not toxic people. I mean, this is the only life we have. We have to, you know, hold those close to us that are good for us and that make us feel good about ourselves, because, you know, we don't know how long we have. I mean, not to be negative, but, you know, this is it for us. This is our life. So,
right.
Yeah.
And, you know, I wanted to say for all of you folks out there who've been listening to this show, if you've had an early loss, some of you may have just recently lost someone, we want to say to you that stay open to hope, stay looking for these post-traumatic growth things. They'll come to you, but right now it may be just getting through your day, one foot in front of the other. Be where you are and take care of yourself. And we wish the best to all the wonderful families who have gotten through this 10-year experience with 9/11. The Pentagon families, the families in Pennsylvania, and the families that died in the World Trade Center, family members. We wish you blessings and love to you all. And I want to thank Heidi and Liz for being on the show today. And I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley. And do you guys have something that you want to finish up with? Liz, do you have any thoughts to close the show?
I just want to sort of reiterate what you were saying, that, you know, I just want to pay honor to all the families, whether they are families who lost someone on 9/11 or people who have lost people in their lives recently or even long ago, that it takes a lot to get through stuff, and it takes making also at some point a decision to move on because it is so painful. So I just have, if you will, a newfound respect for anyone that is going through a loss, and my thoughts are with everyone who's listening today, and I also hope that you hang in there. I have to say that when I went to the quote on your website, Gloria, which says,